In our previous video, we went over the two biggest camps within idealism. This is the distinction between monistic idealism and pluralistic idealism. So in this video, I want to go over the various forms of idealism that are available. Let's begin. Idealism is probably one of the most diverse metaphysics in philosophy. There are many schools of thought that have arisen, and it's almost like each individual idealist philosopher has their own unique form of idealism. Currently, the only main forms of idealism would be subjective idealism, objective idealism, and transcendental idealism. However, I believe these are very bad contemporary terms. We should break up idealism into different camps, just as much as physicalism is broken up into different camps. So here, I'm going to propose a few idealist positions. First, if we are talking about a sort of monistic idealism, then this alone can be further broken up. The first form of idealism is what I would call Eliminativist idealism. The philosopher Samuel Lebens defends a form of this which he calls Hasidic idealism. In this view of idealism, we don't actually exist as real conscious minds. Rather, we are like fictional characters in universal consciousness. According to an Eliminativist idealism, the world we live in doesn't exist outside of God's mind. Rather, the world is kind of an illusion, and the world is just God's imagination. The world and its history is a story that God is telling, and we are just fictional characters within the story. So just as Eliminativist materialism would deny the existence of consciousness, the Eliminativist idealist would deny the existence that we are real conscious minds. Rather, we are just pure figments of God's imagination. The second form of idealism would be reductive idealism. On reductive idealism, all things are reduced to experience. One could think of reductive idealism as a type of dream world where the felt qualities and sensations we experience every day are all that exist, and there is nothing beyond those felt qualities. You experience properties. You experience mental phenomena like color, sounds, textures, forms, feelings, etc. What you experience is properties, not physical objects directly. So it is similar to a dream world where there is literally just the experiences one is having and nothing else. If you remove the properties of an object, there is nothing left to describe an object. Think of an apple. You could describe it as red, round, hard, shiny, and tasty. However, if you remove all of these in-principle, sensible properties, what are you left with to describe the object? You lack a material substance to account for the apple. Instead, you experience it purely in terms of in-principle sensible properties. When you remove these in-principle sensible properties, then nothing is left. So in reductive idealism, everything is constituted by universal consciousness, and we live in its dream. Furthermore, we are all real conscious minds, but we are like dream characters in God's dream. The third form of idealism would be a sort of weak emergentism. Let me explain. On this view, physical objects are not reduced to pure experience. Rather, they are emergent from experience or consciousness. On this view, space-time would be an emergent construct of consciousness, but there would be no ontological distinction between the mental and the physical. The physical world, aka the space-time universe, would just be a particular configuration of consciousness. So the physical world is the geometric representation of consciousness. Space and time are just user interfaces for conscious agents to interact with each other. The fourth form of idealism would be strong emergentist idealism. On this view, the world is not reduced to consciousness, nor is it a construction of it. Rather, the physical world is dependent on a mental foundation. So the physical world is not a configuration of consciousness, nor are physical objects reducible to mental qualia. Rather, the physical is dependent on the mental. So there is an objective physical world that is beyond consciousness. However, that world is still dependent on consciousness. Now, these are not the only views. There are also pluralistic idealism, which is when you have conscious selves be uncreated and eternal. These would be non-theistic versions of idealism, which would deny the creation of selves, and one is free to interpret this in different ways. Finally, there may be views of idealism that have not been conceived of yet, but generally speaking, just as there are many different variations of physicalism, there can also be parallel variations of idealism. Some physicalists may be identity theorists, where brain states are identical to mental states. Physicalist reductionists, where mental states are reduced to brain states, or strong emergentists, where mental states are irreducible but strongly emergent from brain states. Or even functionalism, where mental states are just the functional role of brain states. Now, the same can be said of idealism. There is identity theorist idealism, where brain states are the images of mental states. Reductive idealism, where physical states can be reduced to mental states. And strong emergentism, where the physical world is not reduced to mental states, but may be strongly emergent from mental states. And even functionalist idealism, where brain states are the functions of mental states, or perhaps the brain is the representation of the functional role of a conscious subject. Regardless of which view you hold, I think idealism should be defined in these contemporary terms. The only difference between physicalism and idealism has to do with the priority of the ontology. On physicalism, the physical is the priority ontology, whereas on idealism, the mental or experience is the priority ontology. Either way though, the ontologies are switched, and so there could be different versions involved in each of them. If one wants to understand the basic ontology of idealism, see my video on defining consciousness. So now that we have gone over the different variations of idealism, in our next video we are going to go over the distinction that idealists make between the internal world and the external world.